Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
And greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten as we take our first look at the 2025 Big Ten football rosters. I'm Steve Deace alongside my co-host, never partner, Aaron McIntyre. And I know we are just now getting into Selection Sunday season, Aaron, about 4.5 weeks until we've got an NCAA tournament bracket. And we'll get to some basketball here in this episode as well. But this is also kind of the first opportunity we have now with the transfer portal closed until spring and the two signing periods for high school recruiting now finished. Kind of the first opportunity we get to kind of get some preliminary idea of who's got what coming back for the upcoming college football season.
Yeah, there's an overall observation after the first couple of topics here that I'd like to make that I want to get your take on, because as much as things have changed in college football, and boy, howdy, have they changed, there's one observation that I have that kind of has me scratching my head in the midst of all of this change. So I'm anxious to hear your take on that in just a little bit.
All right, let's do that. But let's first start on the Big Five here on Bigger Ten. Taking a look at what we can tell about Big Ten football recruiting classes being finalized. And there's really 4 points here I'm going to walk through, Aaron, then I want to get your take on them. Number one, when you look according to On 300, the schools with the most On 300 signees, meaning the top 300 consensus players in the country, the Big Ten and the SEC have more players on that list than all the other conferences combined. So that's point number one. All right. Now let's take a look here at point number two. When you look at the team recruiting rankings, you're going to see Texas, Georgia, Alabama, SEC, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Big Ten. Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, Florida, SEC. You have to go to number 12 to Notre Dame to find someone who's not a Big Ten or SEC school. You got to go to 13 to Miami to find a team that's in another conference. So you can even see here. And then you look again, finishing out the top 15, Penn State, USC finishing out the top 15 there as well. So when you look at the overall recruiting rankings, these are the top 50 classes in the country according to On3. You see again, the Big Ten and the SEC absolutely dominant. Point number three. You look at the blue chip ratio. So this is something that Bud Elliott put together several years ago. And every national champion over the last 20 years, I think it is now, has had a blue chip ratio of at least 50% of their roster was 4- and 5-star recruits. That's applied to every national champion, kind of like the Ken Palm rankings in college basketball. And there you can see who are the teams that have the highest blue chip ratio. Oregon at 95% of its recruiting class. 4- and 5 stars. That is redonkulous. I mean, whatever's beyond ridiculous, that is absolutely incredible. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's over 10 percentage points better than Georgia. That's just an incredible amount of talent that Oregon is reeling in, and they're getting the transfer portal too. We'll talk about that here in point number two. But then finally, the fourth thing about the Big Ten recruiting classes is if you take a look at the 24/7 composite rankings, these are the highest rated Big Ten recruiting classes, and they're numbered by where they are in the 24/7 sports composite. So Ohio State would be number one, Oregon, Michigan, but those three teams, based on their overall ratings, are pretty similar. There's clearly a tier there with them. USC and Penn State kind of in another tier. And then you have Nebraska, Washington, Maryland, Rutgers, Iowa, Illinois, in Iowa, all with top 40 classes. That'd probably be another tier. And then that bottom tier there, and all the way down to Purdue at number 98. So those are some of the 4 big points I think that needed to be stressed looking at this year's incoming recruits in the Big Ten. Aaron, what stood out to you about those 4 metrics?
So kind of going with what I teased a little bit ago, just going back here, let's go point by point. There's one wholesale change, I think, and then one notable outlier, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But just going on a case-by-case basis, okay? Would it surprise you a decade ago, 2015, that Ohio State, Texas, some combination of Georgia, Tennessee, A&M, Auburn, LSU, Michigan, would it surprise you that this was the case, that some combination of those teams would have a stat somewhat like this?
No, not at all.
A decade ago. Let's go to the next one. Would it surprise you, again, case by case, would it surprise you a decade ago that Texas could have reeled in the top 10 or the number 1 class in the country? Oregon, the number 4. Michigan, the number 6.
Nope.
Case by case basis. Notre Dame, almost on the top 10. Nope. Not surprising. Nebraska, 21. We might think that's a little bit low for Nebraska a decade ago, but no, that's not surprising. You can go case by case on any one of these. Here's the outlier. Oregon, that's just ungodly. 95% of their class, 4 and 5%. But that's an outlier. Would it surprise you a decade ago, a team like Oregon, Alabama, Texas, LSU, Ohio State would have 69, 70, 76, 81, 80% of their classes be 4 and 5-star recruits?
Nope. Not at all.
So the one wholesale change here is, going back to the previous tweet, is the concentration of 2 conferences in the top 20 and 15. That's the only change here. So that's my point. The more things have changed, the concentration in 2 conferences of all the talent going there, that is the biggest change. But otherwise, when you take it on a case-by-case basis, this is not a whole lot different than what we've seen for decades in college football. Maybe I'm wrong. What's your take on that?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think what you're illuminating, brother, is we haven't seen realignment this round. I mean, realignment is what we saw because of TV markets, 15 years ago. This round, what we really saw was consolidation. And similar to what we saw in an industry you and I both come from, in the radio industry, where we essentially got down to 3 companies, Salem, Cumulus, now, or formerly ABC Radio, and then Clear Channel, now iHeart, that pretty much owned every radio tower. If you're a talk station or a sports station you'd want to be on, they pretty much own all 3 of those. And then there's even more consolidation just down to iHeart, Cumulus, when it comes to the music stations. So that's kind of what you're saying here, is that we didn't get realignment this go around. We got consolidation, except this time the realignment was driven by TV markets 15 years ago, which is why the Big Ten sought to bring Maryland and Rutgers into its stead. In this case, it was a consolidation of brands. That's really what we've seen.
And what we've seen in radio, though, is that the national model of consolidation for local radio does not work. Mm-hmm. It really does not work. But now you've got all of these brands. Northwestern, it's a national brand now because it's in the Big Ten. Vanderbilt, national brand now because it's in the SEC. Now, I'm making an exaggeration here. Those are not nearly the biggest brands, but that's what you're saying here. So I think this model has a much better chance of working than the radio model did. But that's the only only big wholesale change that I can see in these recruiting rankings. Now that we're 5 years into this, we should be able to see, there's not just coincidences anymore. They're not just one-offs. It's a trend, and it's not really that much different than it was 10 years ago.
What you can also see is I don't know that what would be the reason then to do the 2 super conferences? If you got this much consolidation, and this much market share, do you reach a saturation point now where you're down to 2 super conferences and you're just feasting off each other and you're undermining each other? You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, you remember that old joke under the old Twitter management? You remember that joke? I can't remember who shared it, but the censorship was getting so bad towards one side of the political divide. Somebody came up with a tweet that said, pretty soon, Twitter is just going to be 2 angry lesbians yelling at each other for why they don't have any children. That was essentially, that's kind of the same dynamic here. If you start down the road that you're articulating, you're going to be left with like 8 to 10 teams. Why wouldn't you be? That's an exaggeration. You'd be left with like 16 to 20 teams if you start going down the road that you're articulating.
All right, let's talk transfer portal window. There's a lot of different rankings out there, but I like the way On3 does it because they also factor in what you lost, okay? And so there's an overall ratio of what you've lost to the portal and the quality of those players along with the quality of the players you brought in, right? I mean, if you're losing 25, 30 guys to the portal, I mean, as great as your portal class is, it probably undermines how good it is because of what you've lost. So I like the way that they do it. And you can see Oregon shines here as well. And again, these are also numbered according to On3's transfer portal rankings, but it's the order they have the Big Ten. So you can see Oregon did a masterful job with roster retention as well as addition this year in the portal. Rutgers is a surprising number 2 there. Michigan is next, and then UCLA clearly put more emphasis on the portal than high school recruiting, where their class underwhelmed in Deshaun Foster's first year. Minnesota also had one of the worst high school recruiting class ranks in the Big Ten, but one of the best transfer portal rankings. Indiana, and of course, this is where their new coach has really built his brand and trying to take the program to new heights. Washington. So in some respects, these are almost like the inverse of the high school recruiting rankings, except for a couple of teams that are near the top in both in Oregon and Michigan. I don't really know why Ohio State isn't much higher. They did not really lose anybody of great consequence to the portal, even probably added a couple of starters, but they're still in the top 25. And then you can see Michigan State, 50th in high school recruiting, but 25th in the transfer portal, which is not much different than what we saw under the previous head coach there in East Lansing.
Yeah, I mean, if you miss in high school recruiting, you better thank your lucky stars if you came through in the transfer portal, because missing on both is a recipe for a really quick pink slip, I'd have to say, unless you have some form of tenure, which very few coaches in today's game actually have. But yeah, Rutgers having such a great deal of success in the transfer portal, that sticks out. When you couple Oregon's success in the transfer portal along with what we just talked about with their recruiting class, that's a boy howdy right there. Mm-hmm. You know, Minnesota, that's kind of who I'm talking with. You better hope that you hit in the transfer portal if you miss in high school recruiting. And then the rest of the teams, Indiana, that's not too bad. Coming off of what you just did this last season, having the 5th best or 6th best, I should say, transfer portal rating in the Big Ten, that's not too bad. It is a little surprising that Ohio State is barely middle of the pack there, but the rest of them not super surprising in the long run.
And you can see with Penn State towards the bottom there, they didn't have much to add because they're bringing a ton back. I think we can kind of look at this maybe, Aaron, and say, depending on Dante Moore, and we're going to get into the quarterback ratings here in a minute, but, Dante Moore was a big-time recruit out of the state of Michigan a few years ago, signed with UCLA. I mean, Jim Harbaugh offered him in the 8th grade, okay? And he signed with UCLA, started as a freshman, looked shaky. That was 2 years ago, though. He transferred to Oregon. He's been patiently, developing. If he might determine whether or not we have a real Big Ten race this year. If you look at where Oregon is, both in the portal and high school recruiting, overall, they're going to have the best roster in the league. Okay. So the question comes down to, is Dante Moore, because you can't hide your quarterback in college football. How good is he now at, 4 years into his development as a collegian? That might determine how much of a Big Ten race we ultimately have.
Indeed. Yeah. And that's, again, like you just said, you can't hide your quarterback in college football, and I'm anxious to get into your quarterback ratings as well. This is what I was most interested in talking about on today's episode. But ultimately, how much? I feel like we're beating a dead horse here, but how much of a step? And if he took him to the semifinals, it feels weird to say this about a guy, but Drew Aller, I mean, how much of a step is he going to be able to take? Is he going to be able to, because he had a really good season and, the new offensive coordinator there, obviously a huge upgrade for them, but in clutch moments and crunch time, is he going to be able to take a step forward? These are the types of conversations that really determine during the offseason what kind of a race we could have during the regular season.
So in the NFL, if you're putting together a power rating, I would always start with putting together quarterback ratings first. Because over 90% of the time, if you know whose quarterback is going to play better on a given day, you're going to pick the money line winner in an NFL game. Now, college football, where there's more teams and therefore there's more variance, it's not quite as ironclad, but I would say the number is probably still 75%. If you know in a given day which quarterback will outperform the other, you'll probably guess the money line winner. So I wanted to put together for the first time, I've never done this before, heading into spring ball, how would I rank every Big Ten team's quarterback situation? And it's not just based on the talent of the player, but also the situation they're going into, the scheme that they're going to be playing in, the expectations of the program and the scheme on the quarterback position, because some programs are way more quarterback reliant than others. And I tried to factor all those things in together to power rate quarterback situations in the Big Ten heading into spring ball. All right. So here's what I've got. Number one, I have Drew Aller at Penn State. With his overall experience, and Kotonicki coming back. Luke Altmaier at Illinois, although he's going to miss those two receivers. Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, you have to think he's going to develop hugely in a second year. Fernando Mendoza, who was good at Cal, but I think will be really good in the offensive system that they have there, that Cignetti has there at Indiana. Julian Sayin, I think that this is just kind of a baseline. If you're a five-star kid and you've never played a snap, but you're playing for Ryan Day, you've got to be somewhere among the top five quarterbacks in the Big Ten, especially with a Jeremiah Smith to throw to. There's Dante Moore at Oregon. I've got it number 6. Your guy, Mark Gronowski at Iowa at 7. I wasn't sure where to rank him because of his injury and rehab all offseason long. We're not going to see him. He's not going to really throw with the team until this summer. So I'm not really sure. That's not like Max Brosner,
he's a guy who might, the first 3 or 4 games of the season, he might look like he's a bottom tier 12, 13, 14 guy. And then kind of along the lines of, like you said, Brosmer last year, towards the end of the season, he looked like a different quarterback than he did at the beginning of the season. So I think Gronowski's ceiling here is probably like 4 or 5, something like that. But he might not look the part to begin.
And Brosmer, I believe, was a finalist for the Walter Payton Award that Gronowski won.
Yeah.
So they're commiserate as players. So I think that's good analysis there. Preston Stone at Northwestern, I think people are sleeping on him. He was terrific in 23.
Agreed.
Never really came back from that knee injury, got beat out by Keith Jennings. But I think that, with another year to rehab that, I think that's a good get for Northwestern, one of the sneaky gets anyone had in the portal this year. I've got so that's kind of my first tier quarterback situations. Let's talk about the first tier first, okay, before I get to the second. Your thoughts on that list right now?
I really don't have any major quibbles with the entire list. I think Fernando Mendoza, if you want to put him above Dylan Raiola, I would be fine with that. I still have some doubts about Raiola, but boy howdy, were there moments this season. I mean, multiple moments this season where he looked like all-world, like best quarterback in the country type moments. I'm saying moments, not full games. So I understand putting him in the top tier for sure.
All right, second tier. All right, I've got Mikey Keene and Bryce Underwood. I think that race will come down to the Wednesday before the first game of the season. Bryce Underwood is the highest-rated quarterback recruit in the country since Quinn Ewers. He's one of the highest-rated quarterback recruits ever to come into the Big Ten, because remember, Quinn Ewers originally signed with Ohio State. But Mikey Keene played very well for the offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey, that Michigan just hired when they were at Central Florida together. Those are when Keene had his best numbers. Aiden Childs at Michigan State, talented, but showed...
He's the inverse Dylan Raiola in my mind.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. Jaden Maeva at USC... the reason why I'm so down on him is because of the system he plays in. It's so quarterback friendly. And yet there was never a time when he played in the second half last year I thought he's definitely the guy. And they didn't go get anybody that I think can challenge him right away. Billy Edwards at Wisconsin. I think he's a kid that has a lot of unmined talent, but they're switching the system again at Wisconsin. You have a coach in the hot seat there in Luke Fickell. Damon Williams at Washington is a guy that is more of the runner, more of an athlete. That'll be a completely different style of offense than what they played there with the Mississippi State transfer a year ago. But he's got a coach there in Jed Fish who knows how to develop quarterbacks. Joey Aguilar going to UCLA. He's a transfer out of Appalachian State. Put up pretty decent numbers the last couple of years. Ethan Kaliakmanis at Rutgers. We know who he is. Justin Martin looks like he's going to take over at Maryland when they had after they lost Billy Edwards. You've got Drake Lindsay and Zach Pyron. They're in a battle this spring in Minnesota. And then there's a 4-team battle at Purdue right now, and I have no idea who's going to come out ahead in that one.
Yeah, so I think there are 3 names in the second tier that have the best chance of jumping into the first tier. And I don't say, I'm not saying this is a 75% chance with any of them. I'm just saying the best chance. I don't know what that necessarily would be. That's 40%, but that's better than the rest of the names. I'd say Aiden Childs. After a full season of development. I mean, he was the starter all season last year. Now a full off season in a different environment. He has the chance if he can gain some consistency and some poise during the off season. He has the best chance to making the jump up to the first tier. DeMond Williams at Washington, they were making a point this year, or last season, I should say, of getting him in games when it wasn't in doubt, one way or another. So they were really trying to get him some game action, and I like some of the things that I saw from him this season as well. The third person that is, I think, under everybody's radar is somebody at Purdue. I mean, this guy is so good. He's like Cher or Madonna, just one name. That is how good he is. So somebody at Purdue has the best chance of making the leap into the next tier.
Are you ready to talk some hoops?
Not really.
No, not with Iowa looking like they're not going to make the Big Ten tournament. I get that. But Tom Izzo, on the brink of history, you and I are recording this on Tuesday. So tonight, I mean, how crazy is it? He's been the coach there since 1994. 94-95 was his first year. And you think of all the unbalanced schedules, the expansion of the league and everything else that's gone on a couple times since he's been here at Michigan State. And for the math to work out, after all those games and all those accolades, for the math to work out that Tom Izzo could break Bobby Knight's record for most Big Ten basketball coaching victories by beating Bobby Knight's team, Indiana, on Tuesday night to get the job done. It's a truly remarkable college coaching career. And maybe, I mean, to me, he's right next to Bob Knight on the Mount Rushmore of Big Ten basketball coaches. I don't know who the other two names would be because the league does not have a lot of other coaches over the years that had both long-term success, but then also NCAA tournament success. I mean, Gene Cady, I think, is third or fourth all-time in wins, but never made a Final Four, for example. You have a guy like a John Beilein, who had a ton of NCAA tournament success at Michigan, but also wasn't there a lot either. He wasn't there. I think he was there for, 8 or 9 years? So the two names that are certain on that list, Bob Knight and Tom Izzo, it's been an incredible career. And I don't know if you heard what Izzo said over the weekend, Aaron, but he just turned 70. He got a text from Steve Alford.
Really?
And Steve Alford said, listen, man, I see how much your former players follow the team still and everything else. You have the best culture in the league. You should, enjoy the process, relax more, enjoy the process more. And Izzo said after he tied Knight on Saturday, that's how we found out about that text. He told the media, and he said, you know what? I'm going to listen to that. And so for the next 18 hours, we're not talking about Indiana, the Big Ten race. We're going to celebrate this win. I'm going to celebrate with my former players, tying the record, and I'm going to enjoy it a little bit. I thought that was interesting. You're still kind of learning after all these years.
Yeah, and it's particularly interesting and particularly impressive what Tom Izzo has been able to accomplish at Michigan State, especially in the last few years. You look at coaching situations like Tony Bennett. Isn't it Tony Bennett at Virginia?
Yeah, he
just
up
announcing
and quit.
It just up and quit because he couldn't. Let's just be honest. He couldn't deal with the new world. Yep. And for somebody to come into his own in coaching, in fully ensconced, entrenched in the old world of collegiate athletics, to see this through, we think, to the very end, that's impressive. And have success along the way doing it. I don't know. There's not very many individuals. I'm not talking about coaches. Not talking about people at his level of athletic, athletic prowess. There's just not very many individuals who can come into whatever they're doing in their life, whatever their goals are in life, in one completely different environment, see it through to the end in a completely different universe. And so there's not very many individuals. Just name a walk of life who are cut from that sort of cloth. So good on Tom Izzo.
No doubt. Finally, Indiana's job is open again. This seems to be a quadrennial tradition unlike any other. And this has been long been considered the Cadillac program of our league. However, Purdue actually has the most Big Ten championships. However, Michigan's actually been to as many national championship games as Indiana has. And so it's got a rabid fan base, no doubt. It's got a famous state for basketball, one they even make movies about, no doubt. But I went and looked at some data, Aaron. Check this out. The Hoosiers have been to one Final Four since Bob Knight was fired, and that was over 20 years ago in 2002. That's also the only Final Four that Indiana has been to since the year you were born, 1993. Those were the Calvert Chaney teams. Indiana hasn't been to a Sweet 16 since Barack Obama was president. The Hoosiers have one Big Ten regular season title in the last 12 years. All right, so I asked you, with Mike Woodson announcing that he was stepping down after the season, how good is this job? Is it still a blue blood program?
It's still one of the best jobs in the Big Ten, for sure. and I still want to do this. I've talked about it for the last few years, ranking basketball versus football jobs in the Big Ten. And maybe if we're really hard up on topics sometime this spring, we can do that. But when this iteration of Bigger Ten began, they had just hired Archie Miller as their coach. Okay. Great coach. Thought, great fit. This is going to take off to levels hitherto, unseen. Because, Tom Crean had some great moments at Indiana as well, but he wasn't getting the job done to their liking, so they had to move on eventually. So where else would you go but somebody who seemingly is proven like Archie Miller, and that hasn't worked out. So I don't know what you do if you're Indiana. This is such a difficult sport in a really, really difficult league for a number of reasons to have consistent success and really high-level success, which makes what Tom Izzo has done even more impressive. Even if he's not getting to Final Fours every year, just to have that. I mean, look what's going on with Fran McCaffrey and my Hawkeyes right now. It's just a really difficult and competitive sport. So it is still one of the best jobs in the Big Ten, but just having a best job does not guarantee that you're going to make it to a Final Four within the next, half decade or so.
Indiana's had 6 coaches, Aaron, in the almost quarter century since Bob Knight got fired. One of them had a win percentage above 70%. One.
That's crazy.
And that's Kelvin Sampson.
Yeah.
And he got fired at the end of the 2008 season, or towards the end of the 2008 season, for NCAA recruiting violations that no one would care about today. Okay. But he's the only coach of the 6 they've had since Knight was fired that has won at least 70% of his games. He's the only one. All right. When we come back, we're going to play Would You Rather. Stay tuned. All right, Aaron, let's play a little rapid fire Would You Rather, and you're under the microscope here first, my friend. Question for you. Would you rather be hiring the next Indiana basketball coach or Tom Izzo's eventual successor at Michigan State?
Well, based on the conversation we just had, I think it's pretty easy Indiana basketball coach, because the shoes compared to Tom Izzo's shoes that they're going to try to eventually fill at Michigan State. Un poquito compared to Tom Izzo's shoes. So feel like at Indiana, now this is not a record of mediocrity or a record of unmet expectations is never a good thing. Mm-hmm. But that also means that your fan base is somewhat used to tempered expectations. So I'd rather hire the next Indiana basketball coach. But when you lay out the historical context that you just did very well in the last segment, it is utterly mind-blowing that they have not been able to have more success, or at least not more consistency at the very least, over the last couple of 2-3 decades now. All right, this is for you, because I'm a Hawkeye fan, and I just assume that all 18 other fan bases that we try to make this podcast and episode, TV show, YouTube show accessible to, I just assume that you all care about the Hawkeyes as much as I do. Would you rather fire Fran now, or wait till the end of the season, Fran McCaffrey, or wait till the end of the season if you're Beth Getz, Iowa's athletic director?
I would probably wait until they clinch that they're not going to make the Big Ten tournament, because that gives me a talking point and a premise to justify really what's been a lot of consistent meh. I mean, they haven't really done much there. They won one Big Ten tournament. They've never gotten out of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. But they've won a lot of games, and they've been hovering around the NCAA tournament quite a bit. And so you want to send a good message to prospective coaches that you know who you are and the standards aren't impossible. Okay. And so because coaches always view the success and failure of other coaches differently than fans do. And they have a tendency to project, well, if I were in that job, what kind of standards do I think I could meet? Okay. And so I think waiting until it's clinched that they won't make it to the Big Ten tournament gives you a chance to say to the prospective coaching pool, listen, our expectations here aren't crazy. We know we can win here. We also know it's not a national contending, program at the same time. This guy with all his wins still had to go, because that's just an untenable amount of failure.
Here's what's really bad about the situation right now. I believe that Iowa on its roster right now, and coming in next year too, they have some legitimately really good players, And so when you're having this level of just, it's just trying to find the right futility that's when you know it's on the coach.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you know it's on the coach. And I think having, the conversation about ranking best and worst jobs, I think Iowa is at least a bottom 4 job in basketball in the Big Ten. All right, this one's from you.
All right, Aaron, would you rather be Luke Fickell or Mike Locksley this spring? Both of them are probably coaching for their jobs this fall.
Man, I'd rather be Mike Locksley because at least there's some track record there of exceeding expectations at Maryland. So far, Luke Fickell has done nothing to assuage any concerns about the change in culture and styles at Wisconsin. So, yeah, they're both on the hot seat right now, but I'd rather be Mike Locksley. I think I probably know who I am and what I can do at Maryland better than Luke Fickell knows what he's trying to do at Wisconsin. Finally, for you, would you rather be Oregon or Michigan heading into spring ball?
Strangely, I think I would rather be Michigan, even though I think Oregon clearly has overall the better roster. But Michigan actually has its cultural identity on defense reestablished after the bowl game performance and knows what its quarterback situation is. I think there's less variance with Michigan's quarterback situation than Dante Moore and Oregon. I mean, if you told me Dante Moore is a finalist for the Heisman, okay. If you told me Dante Moore got benched week 8, okay. And I think when you've got variance at quarterback, man, I just went through this with Michigan this last year. We're going to put 4 guys in the first round of the NFL draft. Halfway through the season, most of us thought Sharon Moore, disaster. At the end of the season, we're like, Sharon Moore is onto something, okay? When you're unstable at quarterback, your variance is very wide as a team. I don't care how talented you are everywhere else. We proved that last year. So I also think Oregon's fan base, and you've got an owner there in Phil Knight, who is not getting younger and getting impatient. The fans are how many more times you're going to win a bunch of games, not win anything, So I think that's a factor too. I think Michigan fans are more satiated right now than Oregon fans are.
All right.
All right, that'll do it for Would You Rather. We'll come back and wrap it up with the feedback of the week and poll results next. All right, this week's Bigger Ten poll results, we asked you who ends up winning the Big Ten men's basketball regular season title. 37% of you say multiple teams are going to share it. 31% said Purdue. 25% said Michigan State. 8% said Michigan. Why do we single those 3 teams out? Because they're tied for first place in the loss column heading into this week. But multiple teams sharing it was number 1. That's how I would have voted as well. Looks like, Aaron, that's how you voted.
Yeah, multiple can mean 2. So that's sure. Kind of the course that we seem to be careening towards right now. So I'd say multiple teams share it is probably a pretty good bet.
And then that brings us to our feedback of the week. And this is in response to College Football Alerts ranking the greatest college football programs of all time. And you can see Alabama, USC, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Michigan, Texas, Georgia, and Nebraska are the top 9. LSU number 10, forgot about LSU. John Endicott, he says, I'll allow it. He agrees for the most part with the list. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, it looks like he's a Buckeye fan too, and based on his profile picture there. But, I mean, who are you going to take away? Let's throw that back up there again.
Yeah.
Who are you going to take away? I'm not taking Alabama, not taking Ohio State, not taking Michigan, not taking Notre Dame. Probably
Penn
not.
State's got to be on there somewhere. Or are they number 11 maybe?
Probably number 11. Probably not taking Texas. Probably not taking Georgia. Not taking LSU. Nebraska, I know recent times, but back in the 90s, you have to. That
actually
counts for
60s, 70s, 80s,
60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So that has to count for something.
Yep.
If you want to, OU, they've been consistent. They've not been to the heights that they'd like to be the last few years. So I don't really know who you would take away definitively from this list.
I agree. It seems like Penn State belongs on this list. I just don't know who to take off. Okay. It just seems like they belong on it somewhere. And the Ohio State fan, all he cares, he doesn't care who he's on a list. All he cares is he's ahead of Michigan. That's all that matters. All right, great stuff. It's good to be back here on Bigger Ten. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, follow, whatever you can do, or any of those things you can do for us. Helps the algorithms to be benevolent and help us to find more Big Ten fans just like you. And we appreciate all of that. Your comments in the comments section as well. Keep all of that coming, please. You can also follow us in between episodes on X at Bigger 10, at Bigger 10 on X. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next time here on Bigger Ten. Bye.